a lot of people would agree that chaplains in the hospitals are needed and they do wonderful work, but it's a question of who should pay their wages.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the NHS looked at this in, I think, the 1st of October 2004 when Agenda for Change came in, and every single role in the health service was analysed to the nth degree and worked out, and proper, objective reports and surveys were done. And if hospitals think they should keep their chaplains, I think they're probably the best people to ask.
But Dr Harris, you don't think that spiritual care should be funded by the NHS?
Well, it's a matter of government policy. It's not up to each hospital. Each hospital can't decide what to do. The government has said it is fundable. But, I mean, we don't dispute the role that NHS chaplains play. I mean, if I was ill and I saw Richenda leaning over me when I woke up in hospital rather than a doctor with a scalpel, I'd feel much better if it was her. But I wouldn't want to think that was using money that should be spent on medical services, because I know that there are people in hospital who aren't religious and they don't get someone to talk to paid for by the NHS specifically. So it's one of the few, I think it's probably the only post in a hospital that discriminates against those people who aren't religious. And I think those who have those needs, and again we don't dispute that they are a great comfort to those with those needs, should be able to call on their local priest. Every local vicar I know always says part of my job is visiting my flock in hospital. So why should the NHS be spending, I think it's nearer 50 million actually.
So is it about discrimination for you then as part of the secular society, or is it about the funding?
Both things. It's wrong that the NHS should provide a service specifically only for people based on their religious views, when there isn't one for those who aren't religious, who may also want to have a paid-for visitor. So I think the most sensible thing is for those who have those religious needs to have the priest from the parish, their priest, come in,
someone might
or
go
the
in
local one.
who isn't particularly religious and suddenly find, a lot of people do find out at Richenda that when they're in that sort of situation, the first thing people do think is, actually, I'd like to say a prayer, I'd like to have somebody
Absolutely,
with me.
and hospital chaplains are not just there for people with specific religions. They're not there. Also, I think the other point is, if the NHS was only providing services that everyone could access, well, it's just not how it works. I'm never going to need neonatal.
If someone's not religious, then they could have someone to talk to, a paid-for counsellor or visitor. The fact that should be then have £32 million specifically for religious people is basically a state subsidy of religion. Now, as far as I understand it, every hospital has loads of churches around it. We have, a very active Church of England, and indeed the Catholic Church, and indeed Muslim communities. So I think those...
So you'd be quite happy to have a counsellor, a listener, a talker, so to speak, go around the ward, so long as they're not religiously based?
If that was judged cost-effective by the NHS. But the NHS, I think, would spend its money better on clinical staff, and, as I understand it, the Church of England has £6 billion to spend on in terms of its cash reserves, and it could provide and ask its parish priests to do this sort of work, as could all the religions, rather than having the NHS say, instead of 2 nurses, we'll have a chaplain.
I think one of the points to remember is that NHS chaplains are very highly trained and specialised. When I was a chaplain, I did hundreds of baby funerals, for example. Now, an ordinary parish priest doing everything will probably do 3 or 4 in the whole of their service. And so I think, actually, we do need these specialised and wonderful hospital chaplains.
I don't think anybody's questioning as to whether they should be there. It's just a question of who foots the bill.
That's what I think. I actually think for 24/7 care across the nation, it's remarkably cheap.
But I don't think the NHS should be training people in how to do a religious role. That is for the churches, not for the state. And therefore, if it is indeed specialist, and I'm sure it is, and I don't dispute their value, then the church should be prioritising this, each individual church, rather than saying to the NHS, instead of these thousands of nurses, you're going to have thousands of people, hundreds of people, who are going to do this specific job.
But it's the church that could then bear the brunt of that, if you like.
The church does pay a huge amount in terms of training its clergy, and in terms of the ongoing training as well. So I don't think that it's just expecting.
The church gets taxpayers' money, doesn't it, as a subsidy, because it's a charity. So it's not as if the church doesn't get taxpayer help generally. It gets tax back on its giving.
It doesn't get straight money from taxes.
One other point, if I may, just slightly on a tangent. There's no guarantee that the money you would save from not having the NHS pay for hospital chaplains would actually be spent on nurses, is there?
Well, I don't think the NHS has a little bonfire of money that it saves every year. It's forced to make savings year-on-year efficiency gains. And I think if it was able to ask the church to fund these roles, then I think it would have more money to spend, and it wouldn't have people specifically for people of some religion, because we still don't know what people who aren't religious what they do. They don't have anyone paid for by the NHS to come and talk to them who isn't religious.
Let's just turn very quickly to some emails that have come in, some very interesting thoughts this morning. Ollie Nicol says that he would prefer to have a provision of trained counsellors and psychologists rather than somebody of a religious ilk. The Jans Alsop has said, when our son died in 1997, we were so glad the hospital chaplain approached us. We didn't know where to turn in our hour of need. He baptised our son in the early hours of the morning and was absolutely brilliant. They're worth their weight in gold.